Paul came to Jerusalem 20 years after his conversion, 20 years after Jesus was risen from the dead, to worship the God of his fathers according to the custom of his fathers, something that was ingrained in him from childhood. He was raised in Jerusalem, according to the strictest tradition of the Pharisees, but he'd come to believe that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, and to be a follower of Jesus. And some of the Jews were not prepared to accept Jesus was the Messiah. They had crucified Jesus, and they were not going to accept him now. 17 years earlier, Paul had come back to Jerusalem, having spent time in Damascus, to testify to the Jews. But the Lord said, "Depart, flee, because they will not receive your testimony." And so he had gone to Gentile territory and had great success presenting the message of Jesus. Not only is he the Messiah of Israel, but he is the Saviour of the whole world. But he still loves his people, and he'd come back to worship at the temple which still stood in Jerusalem. He was identified by those who opposed him, and they were beating him to death. But they made so much noise in the process that the Roman commander, whose garrison was right beside the temple, heard the noise, came down and took Paul into custody, seeking to defuse the situation. He allowed Paul to address the people, and he gave his testimony up until the point where he said the Lord was sending him to the Gentiles. Since they would not listen any more to Paul, the commander took him into the barracks and would have had him beaten. But Paul said, "You know I am a Roman citizen, and you have not condemned me." So the centurion the next day calls the chief priests and the council to come before him and present their case against Paul. Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, "Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day." And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law?" And those who stood by said, "Do you revile God's high priest?" And Paul said, "I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, You shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, and no angel or spirit. But the Pharisees confess both. Then there arose a loud outcry. And the scribes of the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, "We find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." Now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them, and bring him back into the barracks. But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome." And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will not eat anything until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him. But we are ready to kill him before he comes near." So when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, "Paul, the prisoner, called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. he has something to say to you." Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you." So the commander let the young man depart, and commanded him, "Tell no one that you have revealed these things to me." And he called for 2 centurions, saying, "Prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on, and bring him safely to Felix the governor." He wrote a letter in the following manner: "Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and was about to be killed by them. Coming with troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. And when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell." Then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. The next day they left the horsemen to go on with him, and returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from, and when he understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear you when your accusers also have come." And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together from Acts chapter 23. The intrigue associated with the intransigence of the Jews against Paul. While some of them were prepared to entertain rational argument, the Pharisees could acknowledge that maybe the Lord had spoken to Paul, and that resurrection was possible, and there are echoes in their teaching of the words of Gamaliel 20 years earlier concerning the apostles, that they did not want to be fighting against God. But others of them, who were not interested in a rational debate or an argument, they were determined to pursue their own ideas and agenda, and so 40 of them bound themselves with an oath to kill Paul. All they needed was an opportunity to get him away from the protection of the soldiers. So they proposed to the chief priests, asked for Paul to come down to the council again, but this time we'll kill him before he gets there. You won't have to actually conduct any inquiries. This was the scheme. What they hadn't counted on was the depth of Paul's contact with Jerusalem. Paul's sister still lived in Jerusalem. Paul's nephew was a boy in the schools, and he heard the rumours of what was proposed, as the fathers told the sons, and the sons talked about it, so Paul's nephew learned about it. And although a very young man, we're told the commander took him by the hand, so that makes him sound like he's primary age, but he very clearly understands what's going on. And Paul calls the centurion to take him to the commander. Paul will be delivered from the Jews by the Romans. He's always claimed his legal rights as a Roman citizen, for God is the Lord of all the earth and has appointed all governments. Well, the centurion organises 70 horsemen and 200 soldiers and spearmen to take Paul during the night out of the city. The horsemen take him to the governor Felix in Caesarea, who, having read the letter from Claudius Lysias, holds Paul in Herod's praetorium until the Jewish authorities can come and make their case before him.